Tips from Trestle is brought to you by the Belcher Companies, Navigator Group Purchasing, eMenu Choice Point of Sale, and Clark Food Service and Equipment. Welcome to Tips from Trestle. This podcast is dedicated to discussing the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and leadership. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. As a 25-year veteran of the hospitality industry, I've focused my work on creating exceptional experiences for the customers we serve. My goal for this podcast? Educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living to bring food and hospitality to the front of mind in our industry. Let's bring the innovative and passionate spirit of hospitality to everything that we do, for the residents, families, guests, and employees we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Today on Tips from Trestle, I'm joined by James Lee. James has been a dedicated professional in the senior living industry for over 15 years. He worked his way up from a caregiver in an assisted living community to eventually co-founding Bella Groves, a unique company aimed at providing dementia support and education to anyone in a caregiving role for someone with dementia. He is also a consultant, speaker, and leadership coach in the senior living industry. James, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
I'm happy to be here, Aaron.
Yeah, and so I'm excited to be talking to you because we've been working together with Bella Groves over the past 7 or 8 months now.
Yep.
And what you're building there is really unique. So I'd love to just start with kind of just tell everybody in a couple of minutes what Bella Groves is about, what you're building there, and then we can talk about how you're building culture there as a startup in senior living.
Yeah, awesome. I'll kind of tee this up about Bella Groves in a way that I think it might relate to something we're going to talk about. So Bella Groves, in my view, is the kind of response or solution to the problem I see in our industry that dementia care is treated like assisted living plus. It's just, it follows a very similar model of senior living. And I believe that we need to make a very sharp right turn in the way that we address and support caregivers of anyone supporting someone with dementia. And that means either a professional caregiver or the family caregiver. And in short, senior living at the moment addresses the last 10 to 15% of someone's journey in dementia, whereas Bella Groves is trying to help support the entire journey of dementia from the onset of symptoms all the way through end of life, whether they're in a facility or at home. So there's a lot to unpack there, but that's the gist of it. And, we certainly are in the trenches now of building culture and team, and we have very little benchmarks and protocols to follow. We're inventing as we go. So the work of team formation is probably the most principal work that we engage in as an organization.
Yeah, I find it interesting that, I think a lot of people, if they're starting up brand new, right? Bella Groves has one location, you're building as you go.
Yep.
They would take their 15 years of experience like you have, and they would say, oh, well, this is how I've seen ABC Senior Living do this. I'm going to do this, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit, or I'm going to do this and tweak it a little bit. And what I've found is that that's very much not what you're doing. You're really approaching it. I'm not going to say upside down because that makes it sound like it's not right, but you're really kind of taking the idea of employee empowerment and ownership and building that culture, and you're doing it in a very different way than I've seen other operators do.
Thanks, Aaron. I believe that, in my heart. I'm some of the stuff that I have to talk about, I want to preface that I talk about our industry and the way we do things from a place of love and concern. It sometimes feels like criticism, but I don't think we can actually improve and change unless we name and call out the things that we haven't been good at. So here's one of them. In our industry, we say things about our caregivers and our frontline that we don't back up in our actions. And so I mean things like we say that caregivers are our heroes. We laud the frontline workers and we give, kudos and kudos to them in internal, company communication on social media. But the truth is, caregivers feel burnt out. They feel like they don't have resources. They feel underpaid. They feel understaffed. You talk to caregivers at any community across the senior living industry, and you're going to find a population of people at every facility that feel like that. This message will resonate with them. And I think this is the reason why we treat caregivers as a line item on our, P&Ls, our profit and loss statement. They are labor. They are a labor expense. They are
Yeah.
managed as a labor expense. I think of them very, very differently. Caregivers, I'll start with professional caregivers and I'll move over to family caregivers. Professional caregivers on the front line, they are the resource. They are the resource. They're the natural resource, and companies have a job to refine that resource, to make that resource more productive.
Mm.
Right. So if we were talking about if Bella Groves were a coffee company, right? We wouldn't think of the coffee bean as an expense. We would think of that's the raw material. That's the asset that we need to, take through our processes to get it to the other side. And it's the best coffee bean possible. That's how I think about caregivers at Bella Groves, is that we have to kind of marshal our resources as an organization to take the natural resource of the caregiver's heart and give them all of the refinement and tools and polishing so that they can be great at what they do. And I sincerely believe that, and all of our processes are built around that.
Today, I want to tell you about one of Trestle's senior living partners, Belter. Belter is a food service design, equipment, and supply company that has been providing expert guidance to the food and beverage industry for nearly a century. A strategic partner to the most successful food service operations in the country, Belter provides support in kitchen and bar design, equipment procurement and install, and supplies. Their team of senior living food service experts have experience across the continuum of care. From independent living to skilled nursing and CCRCs, Belter specializes in right-sizing new facilities, modernizing remodels, and providing the right food service equipment and supplies. At Belter, they are committed to creating memorable experiences for their customers and their guests. With their top-notch team and a global network of quality supplier partners, their customer-focused approach is built on a foundation of collaboration and decades of industry experience. So thank you for considering Belter for all of your food service needs. Yeah, I've seen it in hearing, some of the caregivers that you have in the community and the way they talk about how, well, this is what it was like where I used to be, and it's not the same here, And so when I think about the hesitation that maybe leadership would have around employee empowerment in building that culture, right? Culture tends to be something that people think that has to be built at the top and outlined and defined, and then you push it down and you push it down. And I don't think that that's the way it works. It's not just culture on paper, right? I've seen that done in organizations where they spend thousands of dollars doing that, but they don't get the buy-in, they don't get the feedback. In those rooms, it's not frontline staff, right? It's executives and VPs, and they're the ones talking about the culture when it's really not the people doing the daily interaction with residents. So I'm curious as to how you approach working in a structured, regulated environment such as memory care, and how you kind of balance that with this. Let's give employees a little bit more freedom to do what they need to do to be successful.
Man, that is a really amazing question, Aaron, because the premise of that question supports this idea that we have that the caregiver is the natural human resource, and the organization has to, bring their skills to the table to make that resource more productive. So yeah, we're a regulated industry, typically by state. There are rules, regulations, protocols, policies, et cetera, et cetera. But our job as leaders of organizations like this is to understand the rules well enough that we can make them disappear in front of the caregivers. They shouldn't have to worry about, what's the protocol for this? What's the licensing regulatory line item that relates to that? So here's an example. At our Bella Groves location, one of the things that's very important to us is that the residents who live in our care facility have access to every part of that home, including the kitchen. This is where you and I have had some, work together.
Yeah.
It's understanding the regulatory guidelines and knowing the rules well enough to know how do I still accomplish what I want, which is really accomplish what caregivers want, and give them the freedom to kind of play within those rules. So, because you've been there and helped us
Yeah.
create the system, residents are inside of our kitchen all the time. We have to know, like, do they need to wear hairnets? How do they handle food? Do they handle food? Do caregivers need to be in this space with them? Is the door locked? All of those things are things we have to obviously figure out. But what is beautiful about the day to day at Bella Groves is that those rules and guidelines are less of a worry for caregivers. They just know how to invite residents into their own space, which is the kitchen.
Yeah, you make a great point, right? As you're describing it, the word unburdened popped into my mind, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we're unburdening the caregivers to let them do what they do best, which
Right.
is support the resident in that journey, which is different for everyone. They're all at different stages, they're all at different, capacities. And so, how do you get that person who wants to be in the kitchen, who wants to help make lunch, do it, right? I think it's really valuable in creating the right resident experience, because I think that happens a lot in memory care. We worry less about the experience of the residents having, and we worry about getting them on schedule, keeping them on schedule,
Mm.
making sure the
Yep.
routine has happened. Whereas we know routine can be helpful, but they're not gonna. We didn't follow routine in our normal daily
Right.
lives always. So how do the one-offs happen? So how do you manage that lack of routine or including routine, or the balance of the two when you're working a day of the life of Bella Groves?
Mm-hmm. Man, there's so many different ways I could answer that. So I think what bears, some kind of foundational explanation here is that we at Bella Groves go deep, deep, deep into the weeds of dementia understanding. And so the caregiver, just to bring it back to the caregiver, the caregiver cares about making the resident's day better, having those residents be well cared for, have successful days, have happy, joyous days. That's all they care about. They're are they going to go and read a bunch of articles about Alzheimer's research or dementia practices, or comparing and contrasting dementia methodologies? Probably not. Maybe some would, but by and large, we as the leaders of organizations need to understand, what do caregivers want? They want to be successful in creating joyous days. Great. We have to do the research. We have to create the structures. We have to understand the rules well enough that we can create the conditions of play that caregivers don't have to think about that. To your word, we unburden them with all of those things floating around and make the care simple. So I'll give you a clear example of this. Um, all of our caregivers go through a 13-week progressive dementia skills training and skills checkoff. We have had so many caregivers now graduate from those 13 weeks. And at the end of those 13 weeks, we do a capstone project. They have to present to us um, their understanding of our dementia methodology, their application of lessons that spoke to them, and they have to center it around a specific resident. So what it does is it personalizes all of those kind of teachings in real world application. Now here's the amazing part. Caregivers who at the beginning of their employment with us were kind of overwhelmed with this idea that 13 weeks of training, oh my God, um, how am I going to navigate all of that?
Yeah.
By the end of it, every single one of these capstone projects are just they're amazing. They're really like collegiate level in some cases presentations. And talk about empowerment. Empowerment is not saying, hey Aaron Fish, you're new to Bella Groves and this is an expectation of you and let's go deliver great care. Hurrah. It's more about I understand what motivates you. I'm going to give you the tools and the resources to accomplish what is in your heart. And that's what they talk about in these capstone projects is like, I feel so much more capable to do what I've always wanted to do, but people haven't given me this resource and understanding of dementia before. And as a result of that, here's a story of, this resident and how I was able to help her in a way that I don't think I could have done before. That's empowerment.
Yeah, it's so listening to you talk about the amount of time and the investment that is. I would have loved to have had in previous lives 13 weeks to train and onboard and get someone kind of ingrained in culture. Usually you don't see that. And so do you what are some of the obstacles that you guys encounter when you're looking at we've got to do this 13 weeks and then we've got to make time for them to do the work on this capstone project, and how does all of that work when you think about the nuts and bolts of trying to run a successful slash profitable senior
Mm-hmm.
living operation? Because obviously people are out there thinking, man, 13 weeks is nice, but we can't do that.
Navigator is the largest full-service GPO that exclusively focuses on the senior living community. And what that means is we provide products and services that help our members provide a great environment for their residents, such as like MRO, hospitality equipment, food, business products, as well as technology solutions. We actually surround our members with a level of support unmatched in the industry.
Yeah, this is a difference in mindset. Going back to kind of at the top of our episode here, this is what I mean about calling out the things in our industry that aren't serving us. And to me, this is a mindset problem, not a resources allocation problem. So let me give you this example. On any, so you're a K-State fan, right? You follow
Yes.
K-State football. I'm sure they have to learn plays every year, right?
Yeah.
How do they make time to learn plays when they're busy being football players?
No, it's a valid question. No, and I completely see what you're saying, and it makes sense. It's for me, obviously, my mindset is similar of, well, if you don't invest in them, like what's the value you get out of it, right? It's that I literally have said this before. It's like garbage in, garbage out, right? Like if you don't invest the time, you're not going to get the resource, the most value out of it, which in this instance is the
Mm-hmm.
employee and the care that they provide. So um, it makes me wonder, how do we get people in the industry to begin to shift, right? And to begin to look at that, because we know we're dealing with people are constantly talking about labor shortages and
Hmm.
staffing concerns. And I know that you've done some research in what caregivers are looking for in a
Yeah.
role versus what corporate thinks they're looking for. And there's a big dichotomy there, I think, a lot of times. And so I'm curious what you see from that perspective, our industry
Mm-hmm.
needing to do.
Yeah. I'll answer that question by continuing the point of the earlier part of this discussion, that go into that analogy of like, how do football players make time to learn plays? Well, in your mind, you're like, well, duh. I mean, learning plays is part of being a football player. It's just part of life.
Right.
That's how I think of it. I don't think of the 13 weeks as separate from work. I think of the 13 weeks as incorporating what work looks like every day. learning is the cultural expectation set from day one. So the 13 weeks, by the way, is not, okay, you go to a classroom and you do that. We just incorporate it into the daily fabric of work. And guess what happens after their 13 weeks? They keep learning. It's just in a different format, right?
Yeah.
So the thing that our industry, I think, needs to recognize is that it's not about investing time per se. It's fundamentally changing what we think about the role of training and development is. It needs to be an integrated part of work and not a compliance-driven obligatory thing. Because I'm sure you probably know the minimum state requirement for dementia training 4 hours.
Yeah.
Right. And so most companies look at that as like, okay, 4 hours, here you go, 2 days of on the job training, day 4, you're good to go.
Right.
And I'm sure they don't express that to, caregivers in that way. And they certainly don't tell family members that, but we're starting to tell family members that this is the reality of what caregivers in dementia care are asked to do. It's not for a lack of their desire to be successful. It is a shame on us as an industry for not giving people the resources and the cultural expectations of learning to be able to do what they want to do, which is to take care of people.
Yeah. I think about just in the concept of growing as a person, right? Like if you don't come from that growth mindset that I constantly have to be learning something new or expanding my knowledge to be better at what I do, like I'm going to eventually stop growing and then my success doesn't match that. And so literally building a culture where learning is constant learning, continuous learning is valued. I definitely see so much value in that. And so, and it kind of leads me to want to ask you about the kind of the second and third phases. I know the numbers aren't right. It's actually, levels 2 and 1 of Bella Groves, but taking that continuous learning idea and concept to caregivers that aren't employees, and how do you support the larger community with that kind of culture that you're building right now?
I love that. So this may or may not blow your mind. That was a big setup, but here we go. I view the professional caregiver as a proof of concept of how to help the family caregiver. So what I mean by that is that if we understand the natural motivation of the caregiver, which is to be successful in helping a senior living with dementia, it is the same motivation as the family caregiver helping their own loved one with dementia. So if we look at, are we creating learning resources that people intrinsically want to like go through that learning track? If the answer is no, if our professional caregivers don't like the training, families sure as heck aren't going to spend the time doing it. Right. So are we creating the environment of accountability that, okay, here's the learning. Now you need to practice that or get some feedback on how you've practiced that. If our caregivers aren't successfully moving up from knowledge base to application base, then we know that our learning content is still ineffective. So when I say that our caregivers are proof of concept, we're working them through this system that we believe will be how family caregivers get resources. So imagine a family caregiver taking care of mom at home. What if they had this kind of comparable 13-week course, and that their learning instructor or coach were holding them accountable the same way that we hold our team accountable to learning, and that it's very much a skills application kind of criteria. So when you reference levels of our membership service, Bella Groves is trying to help all caregivers from the very beginning of dementia all the way to the end. So the way that looks on paper, level 1 is an online learning center, so people can access relatable, easy to use advice and content about dementia. It's self-directed. a lot of learners are self-directed. Like if you've ever looked something up on YouTube, you're a self-directed learner, right?
Yep.
Level 2 is more consultative. So this is a family that's probably in the middle to later stages of dementia caregiving, and they don't even know what questions to ask. So what we want to do through that, what we call dementia navigator service, is we want to take the baseline of education that you've received and the skills checks that you've gone through, and now we want to help you apply that at home. Be more successful as a caregiver. So we're the coach to help you do that. And then our level 3 is the facility that we opened that you help us out with.
Yeah. So it's kind of if I understand how this all comes together, which I feel pretty confident I do, you're taking this concept of the 13-week training and the capstone, and you just kind of stretch it out and you go, okay, so level 1 is the quote unquote 13 weeks of training. We're going to show you, teach you, give you the resources to have the knowledge base. And then you're ready to maybe continue doing that. And then with level 2, it's how do we support you as a family caregiver to be able to be successful doing this as your loved one kind of goes through the process.
Mm-hmm.
And then level 3 obviously is we're here to help you come be a part of our family.
Yeah. That's a good way to think of it. And it's I also want to impress upon people that it's not a linear thing. Like it's not just you're here, now you're there. Think about college campuses, universities. So I went to UT, University of Texas in Austin. There are undergrads there. There's online learning. There's master students, PhD students, people who just take one class, people who take like electives just to take electives. There are professionals who are retired who come back and do an entire program on whatever it is they want to keep learning in their life. The product of any university is not the campus or the classroom. It's the system of learning. Right. And they convey that in a lot of different ways. So this is also a principal difference between Bella Groves and most other dementia care facilities, maybe senior living. The product of senior living in most cases is the physical room where the care is kind of brought to you. The product is senior housing. In fact, that's even what we call it. Well, most of us call it senior housing. That's our product. Right. Bella Groves, our product is our dementia capabilities, our dementia knowledge. So we express that in a lot of different ways, the same way that a college campus expresses their product of education in different ways. And so having a care facility is almost incidental to us, that it happens to be one of the ways that we monetize our product, dementia knowledge, but there's so many other ways to serve people with that same product.
Yeah, it's a unique concept that, and I told you this from the first time we talked about it, that it makes so much sense, right? Because when you think about the population and the aging population, senior housing is not going to be able to service everybody.
Correct.
So how do we support the mass numbers of people that are coming and need support? We're going to have to come up with new models and new ways. So as we kind of wrap up here, James, what would you tell the listeners should be the biggest takeaway about employee empowerment, building culture with that, the learning model, kind of all the different things we've talked about? What would be the one takeaway that you'd want to give them in all of this?
The one takeaway that I would want people to have from this conversation specific to empowerment is that anytime you are trying to deliver empowerment, for example, I want to empower Aaron. Oftentimes that is based on my motivations, the organization, that's based on my motivations of the action I want Aaron to take. And so empowerment is not really empowerment from that perspective, right? It's just delivery of expectations. Contrasted to that, if I really understood your motivations, Aaron, what do you want? Why are you in this industry? What have you been missing? What do you need in order to be successful? All I need to do to empower you is to reflect back to you that I understand your story and what motivates you. Empowerment is not about what the company needs. It's a reflection of what the company understands of their employee. And so no company is going to be successful in empowerment unless they get that right first. So that takeaway as a summary is empowerment has to be a reflection of the employee's motivations, not the employer's motivations.
Yeah, no, I think that's the perfect way to kind of wrap up this really awesome conversation. So, James, thanks so much for your time, for your wisdom. I appreciate the fact that we get to work together, not just doing podcast recordings, but
me too.
in general. So, I appreciate your time here, and thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
You're welcome. I'll see you next time you're down at Bella Groves.
So there you have it, another one in the books. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Twitter at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestlehospitalityconcepts.com. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.